Now this is a big one. We cover a lot of ground in this video, and I won't blame you at all if you decide to watch along. So we start by saving the user's location, that is the rider's location, to parse, and we save it in the requests class. So you can see we save it over here in requester location. So that's the first thing that we do, and that enables us to show the nearest requests to a driver user. So you're going to need to update the login page so that if the user is a driver, then it redirects to your new view requests page, which then just looks at all the requests that are available, lists them in order of distance from the driver. We haven't done that before, but it's in the past documentation, so you should be able to get there. Just to give you a little hint, I made my life easier by manually creating some other users with nice usernames that I could understand, and also turning our standard user into a driver just by editing it here on parse. And that then stops you having to worry about manually creating users, etc. So then, once we're able to view the requests, we've made it so that when you tap on a request, it then zooms in on that request and you can see both your location and the request, the rider location there. If the rider decides that's too far, then they can tap back and it will go back to the requests page and they can view another one. If they then decide that they want to do that one, yeah, looks great, then they can tap accept request and that will then navigate to a route. So we'll just start the route navigation. There's no route found. We're in a rural area there, so it's not a great surprise. But they then navigate to the route, and also the request is shown as being a taken one because the driver username has been added to it. So there's a lot to cover there, a fair bit of new stuff. As I say, I don't mind at all on this one if you decide to watch instead. But if you want to give it a go, then please do, and best of luck. I hope that went well. Let's get started. So I'm going to begin by updating the user's location on parse because we're going to need that for the drivers to be able to find the riders that are nearest to them. So as I mentioned, there is a way to save locations on parse. So let's have a look at the Android guide to see how to do that. We could just save the latitude and longitude, but then that doesn't allow us to do fancy things within parse like queries to find the closest riders to any particular driver. So if we scroll down, we can see geopoints down here. So creating a geopoint is pretty simple. Just create it just like this from a latitude and a longitude. And we know how to get the latitude and longitude from the user's location. So let's do that right now. So we're over in your location and we want this to run whenever the user's location is updated. So that happens here. So let's do it after we've updated the map. So we'll create a geopoint. I'll call it user location, and that's going to be a parse geopoint, and we're going to create it from the user's location dot get latitude and the user's location dot get longitude. So now we've got two choices where we can put this location. We could put it in the user field up here on the user class. That might be a sensible way to put it, but there's a problem with putting it there. Because what we really want to do later on is to search requests by the location. And that's going to be quite difficult if the request information is in requests and the location information is in users. But I'm actually going to put the user location in requests rather than in users for that reason. And also for that reason, we only actually need to do this if there's a request active. So we can do a little check to see if that's the case first. Just to save a bit of battery. so that we're not uploading the location to pass unnecessarily. So then here we're going to need to do a query to find the relevant request and then update it with that location. So I think we've got a query to find the relevant request already. Here it is. So let's copy that down. In fact, we need it from there. Here we go. So we're looking for requests with the current username being the requester username, and then instead of deleting them this time, we want to put the requester location into the request, and it's obviously user location that we're going to put there, and then we'll save in the background. Alright, so that should update the requester location. You might have noticed that we really want to do that at the very start as well, i.e. here when we run the onCreate method, if we've already got the user's location. So as we've now got a big chunk of code happening in two different places, I will create a method for it. So I'll call it update location. And we'll create it here. Don't know why I keep spelling location like that. So we now don't need that anymore. But we will need the location variable to be passed each time, because it's going to be slightly different. Or we're going to get it from a different place each time. Okay, so remember we only need to clear the map on this part, so I'm going to leave that bit out, but everything else I'm going to cut, and then I forget what I call the method now, update location. There we go, and we should be able to just pop everything in there, and that should work fine. Okay. So remember, that's only going to work though when request active is true. So let's jump back over to our setup with our terminal. Now this is only going to work when an Uber request is active. So let's create a request and then update the location. So I'll go for 10.4, 10.4. You can see I've got a few extras from my testing there. Great. And then let's jump over to Chrome, and we should now have a request. With any luck, it will have the user's location in it as well. So we've got the requester username, driver username, and the requester location 10.4, 10.4. Wonderful. And we've got our ACL as well that we wanted, public read and write. Brilliant. So we've now got all the information that we need to start our driver activity. Just before we do though, I'm going to manually add a few extra users so that we can see a number of different rider requests for our driver when we get there. So we'll add a row there. So as I'm customizing the username, I'll do Rob, put in a random password. Don't need an email address, that will be automatic. Public read and write, and this is going to be a rider. There we go. And then let's add a couple more. Kirsten, rider, and we need a password. And one more. Tommy, password, rider, and we can't leave Ralphie out, can we? So let's have one more in there. All right, so then we'll need to create requests for each of those. So let's have one from Rob, and my location can be 10. Kirsten can be 9. Tommy 8. And finally Ralphie can be 7. Okay, I'm going to get rid of the request from the current user. And finally, I'm going to change the current user from a rider to a driver. So he shall now hopefully be able to see all of the other requests, at least when we write the code for it. Okay, so now we've set up everything in Parse as we need. Let's create our new activity. And this is just going to be a blank activity. Remember, this is going to be our list view for our driver to view all the nearby requests. So blank activity. I'll call it view requests. And again, it doesn't need a back button, so we won't have any hierarchy there. All right, lovely. So it's going to be nice and easy. View requests, we're going to drag in a list view, which should fill the screen, and that's going to have an ID of list view. That'll be fine. All right. So let's write some code to get all of the requests and show them on the list view. So first off, let's get our list view variable up and running. Type that properly. I'm all over the place. List view, and then find view by ID, r.id.listView. There we go. And we're going to need an array list. We might need to access that from several places. So just in case, I'll create it up here. And this is going to be an array list of strings. And initially, I'm going to call that list view content, because it's actually going to change slightly in what we make that. But whatever it is, it's going to be the content of the list view. Okay, then let's set up the list view content. It's just a new array list of strings. And for now, I'm just going to take list view content and add just a test, because I'm just going to check that it's all working and the redirect is in place when we put it there anyway. Of course, we're going to need an array adapter to link our array list to our list view. So we'll call that array adapter like usual. And then we'll set up our array adapter. So that's a new array adapter of strings. And we've got a context of this, a layout of android.r.layout.simpleListItem1, and list view content is the array list that we're going to get our information from. And then finally, we just take our list view and apply the array adapter to it. Okay, So that should provide us just a simple list view with the word test on the top row. Of course, to be able to see that, we're going to need to update main activity to change our redirect user to include the other option. So either they're a rider or a driver. So if they're not a rider, they must be a driver. So I'm going to just use an else statement. You could have an if statement there, and then you might want to have an else statement if there's an error or something like that. But again, I'll just keep things simple and have if and else. So if they're a driver, or if they're not a rider at least, we'll redirect them to view requests. Okay. Now, one thing to bear in mind, if I run the app now, then the current user is actually a rider. Even though I've updated them in Pass, that's not going to update them on the app. So I'm going to cheat slightly and change the onCreate method to manually update our current user to a driver, and I only need to do that locally within the app. I don't need to save it on Pass because I've already updated it there. And I don't mind doing this cheat too much because the real user would never have to do it. We're only doing it to save us having to create a new user for the driver. So now, having done all that, it should redirect the user initially here to the new view requests activity, which should show nothing but the word test at the top. Keep your fingers crossed. And there we go. There it is. Fantastic. So that all seems to be working fine. So now to get those requests. As a reminder, we want to get them in location order. So we want to, well, first of all, we want to find the ones without a driver username because they're the ones that are kind of open. And then we want to order them by their distance from the current driver. So let's get that done. Again, that's something we haven't done before. So let's go back over to the Pass documentation. Here's our code for creating a GeoPoint. Just underneath is the code for a GeoQuery. So this looks pretty good. Let's copy this in and take a look in Android Studio. Okay, so the first thing that we've noticed there is that we're going to need the GeoPoint of our driver, which we don't have a way of getting at the moment. So we're going to need to copy all our code over from your location to view requests to get the user's location. So first of all, I think probably quicker just to write implements location listener. And then instead of using the automatic method creator, I'm going to copy our methods. There we go. So we'll pop those down the bottom. Import all of those. Now let's think what we actually want to do. We definitely don't want to have anything to do with the map. But as the driver moves around, we do want to update the table. So I think keeping this update location method is a good idea, but of course it's going to do something slightly different here. It's going to update the contents of the table. We'll need a location manager. So let's copy that over as well. So location manager and provider. Copy that class in, and then let's grab the code that actually gets the user's location. There we go. So we'll set that up here. Again, copy those classes in. And finally, we'll want to update the user's location, or at least we want to process the update when we found it. So update location, and we're going to want to receive a location there. And of course we want to define it, so public void. Lovely. So whenever the location is updated, we're going to want to search on pass for the nearest requests. So let's copy that code into here. And let's go through it one by one, line by line. So to get the user's location, we've actually got some code to do that already in our update location method here. If only we could find it. There it is. So here, that's our pass geo point. So user location, we're actually going to get that from the user's current location. Then we want to do a query. And what are we querying? We're querying requests. So we're querying the requests, and we want to find the ones with the nearest requester location. So query.whereNear, and then we want the requester location to be near to user location. And a limit of 10 I think is perfectly reasonable. There's no reason really why he wouldn't go for the closest one, but let's give him 10 to choose from anyway. And then I'm just going to add that in so that we get the predicted code as it should be. Okay, so now we've done our test. While we're here, we should just add, so we want to find where the driver username is undefined. Now that's not something that we've done before, but if we have a look at our options, we've got where does not exist, and that looks pretty good. So sometimes you can get the answer for what you want, or what you hope will be the answer at least, from just looking at the predictions from Android Studio itself. So we want a driver, remind myself what it was, driver username. So we want to find where the driver username doesn't exist. Okay, so our usual check, if the exception is null, and then if we've got some objects, so objects.size is greater than 0, then first off we want to clear the list view content array, and I'm actually going to change the default from test to finding nearby requests. So that's what we'll show while we're still searching for requests. So if we've got some requests, then we'll clear the list view content array, and we'll loop through the objects array, or the objects list, sorry, to get all the individual objects. And for now, I'm just going to add the username to the list view content array list. So that's going to be object.get. And then the thing we want to get is the requester username. This isn't going to be of much use to the driver. It'll be useful for us to just make sure that everything's working. And we're going to need to convert that to a string, I think. So we'll use string.valueof to do that. Okay, and when that's finished, we'll take our array adapter and notify dataset changed. So that should update the contents of the list view. Okay, so we've got quite a lot of new stuff there, but let's take a look and see if that works. Now, interestingly, that worked fine, but we only got one result. Now, I've done a little bit of checking, and I think what the problem is the fact that we're doing a GeoQuery and another query at the same time. Now, whether this is a bug within Parse or something else, I'm not entirely sure, but it definitely seems to be the case that if I run this query without the where the driver username doesn't exist part, it works fine and returns all four. Unfortunately, we do need the where the driver username doesn't exist, otherwise we're going to pass on queries that have already been taken by other drivers to other drivers. So what I'm going to do is keep this query as it is without the where does not exist, and then we'll just do a check here to see if the driver username exists or not. And just to show you there, you can see we do get them all in the correct order as well. So I think that's an issue with parse and geo requests, but no matter. I'm going to up the limit to 100, which I think is the default limit for a geo query anyway. And then we'll just do a check here to see if object.get, and then we check to see if that is null, and if it is, then we'll add it to our list view content. So that's not quite as neat as we had what we had before. We're going to have to download possibly a fair bit of information that we don't actually need. And there may well be a better way around that using subqueries. Feel free to post something in the forums to discover a better solution, but with any luck, this will at least give us what we need for now. Let's take a look. Okay, there we go. And just to make sure that is working, let's pretend that Kirsten has got her driver. Doesn't really matter what his username is. Ethan. Don't know where Ethan came from, but let's just run that again now, just to make sure that Kirsten is no longer on the list, and therefore our method here is working. Our next step then, once we've made sure that that's working fine, is to be able to tap on any of these and then go and view the precise location of that user and allow the driver to select that request if they want to. And there we go. That's fine. So our system is working even if it's slightly inefficient. So let's now create the other driver activity, which is going to show them a map with the location of the user that they've selected on it and allow them to select that request if they want to. So of course, over in Java, a new activity. This is going to be another Google Maps activity. So I'll call this view rider location. It's going to be full screen anyway, actually, so the title isn't going to appear for the user. View rider location. Okay, great. We've already got the Google Maps key, so we don't need to worry about that. It's doing some synchronization, so we may not be able to access all the Java files until that's done, but we can sort out the location XML. Here we go. So we're going to need to do the same thing that we did before. So we'll take our relative layout code from the main activity and pop it in here. In fact, let's take it from your location. Then we won't need to adjust anything for the margins, etc. There we go. So now that map fragment is within the relative layout, so we can add buttons. I'm going to have a nice button at the bottom in the middle that says accept request. I'll call it accept request, and we'll just boost it up a little bit from the bottom. Great. And that's going to be accept request. There we go. And because this is full screen, we're not going to have a back button up the top there. So I'm going to add another button to go back. We're in Android here, so they're going to be able to use the back button if they want to, but always good to have on-screen navigation just in case. So let's use a small button. I'm going to put it at the top left, and it's going to say back. And it's going to have an on-click of back. All right, so that's set up our map. Before we work on those buttons, I'm going to get the location in this point correct. So we're going to need to pass some information from view requests to view rider location when the table is tapped. So let's get that done. On our list view, we'll need to create a on item click listener, as we've done many times before. And this is going to have a new on item click listener. And this is where we need to think a little bit about what's going to be displayed to the user and what's going to be stored within our app about these users. Because it's not very useful to say that there are 3 requests available, Rob, Tommy and Ralphie. That doesn't give our driver any information about those other than their names. And as this is going to be an anonymous app anyway, the usernames are unlikely to be as helpful as that. So really, we're going to want a distance here for the driver to see how far away the users are rather than the username. So let's quickly see how we might do that. Again, that's something we haven't done before. So let's do a quick search. Android, Java, get distance between 2 locations. There we go. That first result looks pretty perfect. Okay, yep, so we've got latitude and longitude. There we go, distance 2. Okay, that seems pretty perfect. Now we've got a rather more complicated class there. So let's see if we can figure out the distance 2 method. So here, once we've got the driver username being null, we can check the request location and see how far away it is from the actual user's location. So if we do that here, remember what we're looking for is the distance2 method of the location class. So I think if we take our location, so let's take user location, we can then use, there we go, look, distance in kilometers to, distance in miles to, distance in radians to. So because I'm in the UK, I'm going to go for distance in miles to. You can go for kilometers if you'd prefer. And then we need to get a, that's interesting. Notice what we're using there. That's actually requesting a pass geopoint. And yes, I didn't notice user location is actually a pass geopoint, not a lat lung or a location. But that's fine actually. So this means this is a pass method rather than an Android one, but we've actually got both of our locations in that format anyway. So that actually works out really well. So distance in miles to, and then we just need to get the requester location. So that's going to be object dot get and then requester location. And we're going to need to cast that to a geopoint. Lovely. So now we've got the distance in miles. Let's put this straight into the list view content array list, and we'll use string.valueof to get the value of it as well. So that's the number of miles, and then we'll just add miles so we know how far away that is. Okay, I think worth doing a quick run of that just to make sure that that's all worked, because we've got quite a lot in that line there. But that should then show the number of miles away for each request, which is much more useful to the driver than the username. It doesn't solve our problem that we actually had over here though, which is how we're going to pass that information to the new activity. Well, I think the easiest way to do that is to have an array list of pass objects and then store the actual objects themselves. And then we can pass all the information to the new activity and use it as we need to. So let's do that here. We'll create an array list of pass objects. And this is going to be requests. Let's just take a look. There we go. Okay, that's worked out absolutely fine. I think we've got rather too many decimal places there. I think one decimal place will be absolutely fine. So let's just do a quick search, probably a Java function. Round to 1 decimal place. That first result looks pretty perfect. Okay, so we've got rounding mode. Actually, the user gave us this great example, and we want a string anyway. So I'm going to use this example to round to 1 decimal place. So I'm just going to copy that down. And rather than putting that all in one line, which is going to get pretty confusing, I'm actually going to copy this part back out again. And I'm guessing that this is a float, but we'll see if it's not. So we'll have distance in miles. Okay, and it's not a float, it's a double. Fine. There we go. So distance in miles. So now we're going to use string.format, but instead of 0.912, etc., we'll use distance in miles, and instead of 5 decimal places, we'll have just the 1. Okay, so I'll just run that again while it's compiling. We'll carry on. We'll check that that looks okay in a minute. So over here, we were saving the pass objects as requests. So let's do that here as well. So we're going to want to clear requests, and we're going to want to add the object to requests. There we go. So now we're going to have all the details about each individual request right there in our requests array. Let's have a quick look. Now that's certainly not quite what we want. That's in a different format. So let's jump back and try that again. Now that we know we've got a double, let's specifically see how we round a double to 1 decimal place. Let's try that second result. Here we go, this looks better. So we've actually seen this method before. Essentially multiplying by 10, rounding to the nearest whole number, and then dividing by 10 again. So let's use that method. We may need the double. So I'm going to create another double, distance 1 dp, which is going to be that code there, but of course instead of this num-sum nonsense, we'll use distance in miles. Okay. And then we'll take our distance 1 dp, convert it to a string, and that, with any luck, will do the job. So we've taken our user location and compared it to the requester location to get the distance in miles. We've then rounded that to 1 dp by multiplying it by 10, rounding it to the nearest number, and then dividing it by 10 again. And then we've put that into list view content. So once again, I'm pretty confident that we've now got something that works, but we'll just run it and check. Okay, so now we've saved the pass object. So we can now pass that to the new activity when we use an intent to jump to it. So let's set that up now. So I've got a new intent within the application context, and we want to jump to view rider location dot class. Then we want to take the intent and put an extra, and we're going to pass a pass object this time. So that's going to be requests dot get, and then position. Now, unfortunately, we do have a bit of an issue here. We can't pass objects from one activity to another. So a quick way around that is just to decide what data we do actually need and pass that instead. So if we go back to the rider location layout, we're going to need to know the location of the rider, of course, to display that on the map. And we're also going to need to know the username so that we can accept the request. So let's send those instead of sending a pass object. So I'm going to change this to an array list of strings. This is going to be usernames. And as we can't send locations either, we'll have a float for latitudes and a float for longitudes. Okay. And by the way, if we just check that, that's now working fine. We've got our lovely 1 decimal place. Okay, so let's update. Instead of updating requests, we'll update usernames, latitudes, and longitudes. And then we're going to need usernames, and we'll add object.get. In fact, if we use get string, that should get us what we need. and we want the requester username. There. So just to remind ourselves, requester username is what we're after there to identify the particular request. We want latitudes. To add, and object dot get pass geopoint, and requester location dot get latitude. Now, as you may have seen, that's a double. So actually, let's call these doubles rather than floats. That'll make life slightly easier. Okay, and then same with longitudes. Object got get past geopoint. Requester location dot get longitude, and we actually need geopoint there. Okay, so now we've updated quite a lot there. So I think what I'm going to do, instead of doing the intent, I'll just do a quick log to check that that's worked. So we want usernames dot get position, and we'll just do the other ones as well. So latitudes dot get position, and we're going to need to convert that to a string, and then longitudes dot get position, and convert that to a string as well. So let's have a quick check. We should now be able to tap on one of the items in the list, and we'll be able to see the username and the latitude and the longitude of that item. Okay, and just before we run that, let's just make sure we initialize those. We'll do them next to the array list there. So we've got usernames is equal to new array list strings, and then latitude is new array list of doubles, and longitudes is a new array list of doubles as well. Okay, so now we should be able to see the username, the latitude, and the longitude of the item that's been tapped on each time we tap on it. All right, here we go. So we're ready to test that out. You can see that I've left in a couple of my testings here. I actually had a bit of a nightmare where it wasn't printing anything to the logs, and it turned out I just had to restart everything. Somehow it got disconnected from the emulator to Android Studio. But that was a bit of fun, and if we now just check that, you can see we are getting the username and the location as well. Fabulous. Right, so now we can move on. And let's set our intent to contain these parts here. So we're going to have a position, which is going to be usernames.getPosition. And then we'll have latitude. And then we'll grab latitude.position. We might as well keep it as a double. And then same for longitude. Yikes. So longitudes.get and position. Okay, and then we can now start the activity. Which should jump us over to the ViewRider location class to be able to get those 3 bits of information. So for now, I'm just going to run that and check, make sure it does jump over and that the map is correctly displayed. And then we'll add our code here to the setup map method. Here we are. So now if we tap on that, excellent, it does jump over. Wonderful. And we've got those 2 options as well. Okay, so let's grab our intent. And what I think I'll do is set it up here so I can access it from anywhere. And then, and actually we're going to need to put that before setup map if needed. Otherwise we won't be able to access the intent variables in the setup map method, which we're going to need. So there we go. I is equal to get intent. Okay, and then first off, we'll copy our code over from your location where we had our code to animate the camera and add a marker. There we go, which is what we want to do. So instead of location.getLatitude, we're going to want I.get double extra, and the double extra that we want is latitude, and we're going to want to convert that to a float. We'll have 0 as the default. Maybe it'll let us do that with an extra, with a double, sorry. And then same with longitude. And we'll set the default to 0, and we'll have the zoom level as 10. And then same as before. In fact, we'll just copy those down there. And this one is the rider location. And we don't need that marker either. All right, so let's take a look. With any luck, that should now zoom us in on the particular location that we tap on and allow the driver to decide whether they want to try and get there or not. Here we go. Let's give it a try. Here we go. So now let's just tap on that. And there we go. We've zoomed into that particular location. Fabulous. Now, showing the user's location on its own is not that useful when we don't actually show the driver's location as well. So let's add that in. We've got 2 ways that we could get the driver's location. Either we could set up all of the location listener code in this activity, or we could pass it from the previous activity. So view requests. I think either way is fine. We've written the code to add the location listener quite a few times now, so I think we'll keep things simple and just pass it from this activity to the other. So in order to be able to get that, what I'm going to do is define location globally. So up here. And then we can access it directly, which means we don't need to pass it anymore to update location, because it's going to be able to access it anyway, regardless of where it comes from. There we go. So then we can access it here as well. So we can just put it directly into our intent. So we'll have user latitude, and that's going to be location dot get latitude, which is a double, and then user longitude location dot get longitude. Okay, so now we've passed that. To create a marker for that, we're going to need to do the same thing that we did here. Now we do have a slight complexity though, because of course we don't know how far away the request is going to be from the driver. So we don't know what zoom level to set. So let's see if we can find a solution to that online. So we might search for something like Android, Google Maps, show to location zoom. That's exactly what I searched for as a little test. And here we go, Android map version 2, zoom to show all the markers. That's exactly what we've got. So it looks like here we can use a builder to create latitude and longitude bounds, which sounds perfect. So let's try doing that. We'll copy that bit of code first. Now here, you can see it's looping through a list called markers. So we're going to have to add our markers to that either list or array list to be able to loop through them. So that should be pretty straightforward, right? We just use an array list of markers called markers, and that's going to be a new array list of markers. And then to add a new marker to our array list of markers, we can just use markers.add, and then this whole code will give us a marker. We just get everything in the right place. There we go. So a marker is actually mixed with the map itself. So we don't need that anymore. And then we'll, in fact, let's copy that code and create the user's marker. So it's going to be exactly the same, except we're going to use user latitude and user longitude. And that's going to be the user's location. Okay, so now it's looping through our markers and adding those to the builder. We then need to create some padding and a camera update. Now I'm interpreting that padding as meaning, as it says, the offset from the edges of the map to our markers. I would like a little bit of padding, so I'm going to try a padding of 10, see what that does. And then I think I always prefer an animation rather than not. So let's move that, and that should go up there. And our map, of course, is mmap, not Google Map. Okay, so if our helpful Stack Overflow expert is correct, I should definitely get rid of my second animate camera. But now we should find that we've got two markers on the map and the bounds are set appropriately so that there's a little bit of padding and we can see both markers on our map. Here we go. Let's give it a try. And we've got an error, sadly. Let's have a look. Let's not be too disheartened. Map size can't be 0. Most likely layout has not yet occurred for the map view. That's an extremely helpful error message. Let's pop back and have a look at our code. There's a clarification. All movement methods require the map object to have passed the layout process. So we need to add on global layout listener to make sure that that's happened. Okay. All right, so let's take this code, which uses our relative layout and then adds an on global layout listener before running the code that we had before. All right, so let's put this in on create. Now, relative layout, we do have a relative layout, but I don't think it has an ID yet. So let's have a look. Nope. So let's just copy the code to create an ID. We'll call it relative layout. So add all of those, and then we want that to be relative layout. So we're adding an on global layout listener, which will call our code as soon as the map layout has completed. So let's put all of that in there. All right, let's try it again. So it's definitely a message, if you haven't got it yet, that when you're getting code from the web, there's usually a little bit of setup and a little bit of working out how it works, which is generally good because we don't want to be just copying and pasting blindly. We want to have at least a vague idea of what we're pasting and why it works. All right, so here we go. Tap on that first one again. And there we go. So that has worked. I think the one issue we have is we need a little bit more padding because that's not enough to bring everything in. So I'd say padding of 50 if that's a padding of 10. And I think we also want to change the marker colors so we're clear as to which one is which. They can obviously tap on it to find out. And notice that when they do, they can load it up in Google Maps or get directions. We're going to give that to them automatically. And actually, because we want that label to be visible, I think I'm going to increase the padding to 100. So we haven't seen, I don't think, how to change a marker color. So let's do a quick Google. Android Maps change marker color. Change color of markers. Looks good. And here we go. So we're essentially changing the icon to one with a different hue. So I'm going to add that in here. So just before the title, let's set the icon. Add that code. That all looks fine. I'm not certain I want orange though. So let's see what's available to us. I'll go for blue, I think. Okay, so we're going to have a blue one and a red one, which sounds fine. And we've got a lot more padding. So let's have a quick look. And just make sure that that does look how we want it to. All right, so let's just check. We'll use a far apart one this time. It's unlikely that anyone's going to respond to a request 300 miles away, but we can see that there very nicely. Okay, so 2 bits to set up then. The first is to accept the request, and the second is to create the back button. So to accept the request, we're going to need to do 2 things. We're going to need to mark the request on pass as accepted, and then we're going to redirect the user through Google Maps to get directions to our new location. So the first one we should be able to do no problem. Let's just remind ourselves what the onClick was. Accept request, makes sense. And let's set that up then up here. Public void accept request. It's going to be called by a button, so that's a view. So looking back on pass, we need to update the requests to put in the driver username. So that's of course the username of our current user. So let's put that up here. So public void accept request. It's going to be called by a button, which is a view. And then let's just remind ourselves, we're going to want to update the driver username here to the current user's username. So we're going to need to do a query for the specific request. For that, I think I'll just copy our code from the view requests. Here we go. So here's our pass query. We're not going to need most of this, but I'll copy it all over anyway. There we go. So we're querying results, but we're not looking at where near this time. We're looking at where equal to, and we want the requester username to be equal to the username that was passed to the intent. So that's i.get string extra and username. I'll just check that that was indeed the case. I'm pretty sure it was. So from view requests, the intent was, I've got it position here, which I don't think is accurate. Let's call it username. Makes a lot more sense. Okay, we don't need a limit. We're only expecting one. And then let's get rid of all this code. And the logging as well. So as usual, we're checking if E is null. Then we're checking if objects.size is greater than 0. So if we're returning something, and if we are, we're going to loop through it. So for pass object, and we're looping through the objects. And then for each object, we want to put, and we want to update the driver username, that's this bit here, to be equal to the current user's username. So that's pass user dot get current user dot get username. All right, and that's all we need to show that the request has been responded to. We now need to set the guy off using Google Maps directions. That's something that we haven't done before. So Android initiate, oh, there we go, directions. So I put Java on the end there just to be clear that we wanted a programming result rather than just a general, how do you do directions in Android. Launching Google Maps directions via an intent on Android. That looks perfect. Okay, and yep, that all makes sense. So we're creating an intent, which is an action view similar to before, and then we're passing a particular URI, which is going to have the latitude and longitude in it. We've got two sets of latitudes and longitudes there. And we definitely want to navigate from the current location, so we don't need the second, or we don't need the first set, we just need the second. All right, so let's grab that code. And then let's update it so we get rid of the S address and we just have the D address. And then here is where we want to put our latitude and longitude. So the latitude is going to be, let's copy it from where we've got it. So we want this latitude, not the user's latitude. But the requester's latitude. And then same thing for the other one. It's very helpfully put some backslashes in there, which we actually don't want. And we don't need that final one either. So we've got a comma and then get double extra longitude. Okay, and we've got start activity, so that should work straight away. All right, so let's give it a look. We should now be able to choose one of the items, view it on the map, and then decide that we want to take it. And then when we tap the button, that's updated on pass. But of course it won't be unless we save it. There we go, and we should wait until it's saved to do our intent. So again, we'll check for a lack of exception, and let's try that again. It's always good to have the process of, as it's compiling, just thinking through what it's supposed to do, and then sometimes you do realize that you're missing something crucial. So once that's saved in the background and the driver username is updated, we're then creating an intent to go to Google Maps with directions, so directions and address, and we've got the latitude and longitude, so it should pick that up. And Android knows that maps.google.com is something that should be opened directly in the Google Maps app, so that should link over straight away. All right, let's find out. Here we go. So we'll choose the nearest one, which makes sense. And then that's displayed very nicely. So accept request. And then we want to open that with Maps. And we'll go for always. That will then save the option on the emulator. And then you can see we're now given the option to do that route. Fantastic. And we can do the actual navigation there. Okay, fine. We'll ignore that for the moment. So then it'll give us the directions. Fabulous. Last thing to check then is, did that update on pass? We should, with any luck, find that one of them has our driver's username. There it is. And that's Rob, the one that we accepted. Brilliant. So we've done a lot of work in this one. And we've come a long way. So we can now view all of the requests that are open with the nearest one first. We can then view both of the locations. So that's the location of the current user and the location of the request that they've made on a map. And the user can choose to select that particular request if they want to. And if they do, then they are taken to Google Maps to navigate there. There's one thing that we are missing, of course, and that is the back button. Shouldn't be too tricky. So let's very quickly put our code in for the back button. I'm fairly sure I chose an on click of back. Yep. So let's make a really quick back method. Again, it's going to be called by a view. And all we need is an intent. Now we've got another intent there actually. So I'm going to call this one intent. And oh, that one is already intent. That's a bit of luck. So intent, and this is going to be a new intent within the application context. And we're going to jump back to view requests. class. There we go. Start activity intent. Wonderful. So while that's compiling, we'll just think about the last thing that we need, and that is for the rider to be able to see that they have got someone who's coming towards them. And it would be really nice if the rider could see something like this, so they could see both their location and the user's location and know how far away the user is. So that's what we'll be doing in the next video. Let's just check that the back button works. There we go. We'll tap it and we're back again. Wonderful. So well done. This was a long video. Well done for getting this far, and we'll see you in the last one for this section in the next video.